Hayes pushed her equipment scanner across the wet soil. The forest moon 7 was covered in thick vegetation and strange plants that humans had never seen before. She was alone here, collecting samples for the scientific team back at the settlement. Her heavy suit protected her from the toxic air and the dangerous creatures that might be hiding in the shadows. She knelt down to examine a cluster of crystalline rocks when she felt it. A small tap on her back, then another. Froze. She turned slowly, her hand reaching for the emergency flare on her belt. What she saw made her stop completely. 3 creatures clung to her suit. They were small, barely half her height. Their bodies were covered in metallic fur that shimmered between silver and deep blue. Each one had 4 legs with curved claws, and their eyes were large and round. Had studied the briefing files on biology. These were cubs, young, apex predators. But they did not attack her. The closest cub opened its mouth and made a sound like a chirping whistle. It was not a warning call, recognized the pattern from the recordings. It was a distress call. The cub climbed higher onto her shoulders, its claws puncturing through the outer layer of her suit with desperate urgency. The other 2 followed, scrambling over each other to reach her head. One of them made the same chirping sound, then paused and made it again, louder this time. Training told her to back away. Were dangerous. They hunted in packs. They were known across the galaxy as creatures that showed no mercy. But something in those large, round eyes made her pause. The cubs were not trying to hurt her. They were looking for something else. They were looking for safety. She watched as all 3 cubs huddled together on her shoulders. Their bodies trembled. The metallic fur that normally shimmered brightly had become dull, almost gray. Their claws, which could slice through reinforced steel, now gripped her suit gently. Understood what she was seeing. The cubs were young and scared. They were lost. And for reasons that made no logical sense, they had decided that she could help them. Slowly raised her hand and extended it toward the cub closest to her face. The little creature flinched but did not jump away. It sniffed her gloved hand. The tip of its nose was soft and warm, felt something shift inside her chest. This was against protocol. This was dangerous. This violated every safety measure the settlement had established. She did it anyway. Unzipped her heavy work jacket and pulled open the front of her suit. The cold air of the forest moon bit at her skin, but she ignored it. The 3 cubs looked at the opening. They looked at her face. Then, with careful movements, the first cub climbed from her shoulders and slipped inside her jacket. The other 2 followed quickly, burrowing into the warmth of her body. Pulled the jacket closed around them and felt 3 small shapes settle against her chest. Their trembling did not stop immediately, but it became less violent. She could feel their breathing slow slightly. One of them made a soft, chirping sound again, but this time it sounded different. It sounded like relief. Sat down on a moss-covered rock and held her jacket closed. She had a problem now. The government had a strict policy about dealing with their young. The cubs belonged to the Empire, and if the settlement found them, they would be returned through official channels. But it also spent years studying alien cultures. She knew that for all their reputation as killers, maintained complex family units. These cubs had a mother and a father somewhere. The question was whether the settlement would care about reuniting them. She stayed in the forest for another hour, sitting perfectly still while the cubs slept against her body. She could feel their heartbeats, small and quick. She could hear them breathing. One of them made a soft, chirping sound in its sleep and carefully placed her hand over it, providing more warmth. When she finally stood up to leave, the cubs woke but did not try to escape. They clung to her jacket as she made her way through the thick vegetation toward the settlement. The path was long and moved slowly, protecting the 3 lives now pressed against her chest. She thought about what she would say when she arrived. She thought about the protocols she was breaking. She thought about the treaties that might be affected by her choice. Most of all, she thought about the 3 small creatures who had chosen to trust her when they had every reason to be afraid. The settlement came into view as the sun began to set. Could see the lights of the domes and the shapes of the buildings in the distance. She knew that the moment she stepped through those doors, her life would change. The decision she had made in the forest, the decision to shelter 3 cubs against all logic and training, would ripple outward in ways she could not predict. But as she felt the warm weight of the sleeping cubs against her body, knew she could not regret it. The alarm bells in her mind started ringing the moment she entered the medical bay. 3 cubs being carried by a human officer. The medical team froze. One of them reached for the emergency containment controls, but raised her free hand to stop them. "Do not," she said quietly. "They are not a threat." Dr. Jackson stepped forward, his face showing every bit of his confusion and concern. "What are you doing? Those are young. Do you understand what this means? We need to contact the Federation Council immediately." Held her jacket firmly closed. The cubs had woken during her walk back, but they remained still and quiet, sensing the tension in the room. "I found them alone on the forest moon. No signs of parents nearby, no signs of a hunt. They were lost and scared. I could not leave them to die." "You should have called for support," said a voice from the doorway. Commander Victor Reeves stood there, his uniform crisp and his face hard. He was the settlement's military leader, and he did not like uncertainty or rule-breaking. "You have put this entire colony at risk with one reckless action." Met his eyes. "The cubs are not weapons, Commander. They are children. What kind of humanity do we claim to represent if we leave children to die in the cold?" The argument that followed lasted for hours. The Federation Council was contacted. Messages were sent across the galaxy. The situation escalated quickly from a single act of compassion to a potential diplomatic incident. The government demanded answers. They wanted to know how human hands had touched their young. They wanted proof that the cubs had not been altered or damaged. Through it all, refused to hand over the cubs to anyone. She stayed in the medical bay, keeping them warm inside her jacket, feeding them a nutrient paste that the team had developed. The cubs adapted quickly. They followed her movements with their large, round eyes. They made the chirping sounds whenever she left the room, and they calmed down only when she returned. Commander Reeves came to see her late on the second day. He carried a sealed message from the Federation Council. His expression was grim. "The Council has decided that you should release the cubs for official transfer," Reeves said. "They will be returned to the government through proper channels. This is a direct order." Shook her head. "I will not hand them over to a bureaucracy that sees them as objects to be transferred. These are living creatures with thoughts and feelings. They have already been separated from their parents. I will not abandon them to the mercy of officials who see them as property." "Then you are refusing a direct order from the Federation Council," Reeves said. "I am confirmed, and I am willing to accept the consequences." The commander did something unexpected. He sat down beside her. He looked at the three cubs nestled against her chest. One of them reached out and touched his uniform with one small claw, curious about the shiny buttons. "Do you know what they have done to human colonies?" Reeves asked quietly. "Do you know about the settlements they destroyed, the people they killed?" "Yes," said. "I have read the reports, I know the history, but I also know that individuals are not responsible for what others of their species have done. These cubs are innocent. Their actions did not destroy anyone." Reeves watched the small cub examine his buttons. The creature made a soft chirping sound. "You realize that protecting them might be seen as betrayal by the families who lost people to attacks." "I know," said. "But if we become like them, if we kill the innocent to punish the guilty, then what are we fighting for? What does humanity mean if it does not include compassion?" Commander Reeves sat for a long time without speaking. Finally, he stood up. "I will tell the Council that you have escaped containment with the cubs. By the time I report your location, you will need to be gone. I suggest you move quickly." Understood what he was doing. He was giving her a chance. She packed quickly, taking only what she needed. The medical team helped her prepare supplies for the cubs. Dr. Jackson provided nutrition packs and medical supplies. Others added warm blankets and protective gear. By the time the alarm finally sounded that had gone missing, she was already in the settlement's northern storage facility, a secure location that few people knew about. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Stories began to spread across the SAT in a dark room with a single light, listening to the voice coming through the encrypted communication device. The voice belonged to a named. He was one of the underground peace advocates on and he had been searching for the cubs for weeks. "The cubs' parents are named and," said, his translator converting the harsh clicking sounds into simple human speech. "They were taken by the Crimson Order. Have you heard of them?" Had not, but she was learning quickly. The Crimson Order was a faction within society that refused to accept any idea of peace or cooperation with other species. They believed that they were destined to rule the galaxy through strength and violence alone. When they discovered that and were meeting with human diplomats to discuss peace, they took action. "They captured the parents and released the cubs into the forest," continued. "The goal was to let them die. A parent separated from their young is a broken creature, and would suffer, and the peace movement would lose important voices. "Where are they being held?" asked. "That is the problem," said. "We do not know exactly, but we know they are on the prison moon Vex 9. Breaking them out will be nearly impossible. The Crimson Order has turned it into a fortress." Looked at the three cubs sleeping peacefully on a cushion nearby. They had grown noticeably in the weeks since she found them. Their eyes held more awareness now. They understood simple words and followed commands. But they did not know that their parents were alive. They did not know that the separation was temporary. "I will find them," said. "If they are alive, I will bring them back." "You cannot do this alone," warned. "The Crimson Order will kill you before you take 10 steps into their territory. You need help, and that help must come from species they do not expect." Began reaching out to people she trusted. She sent secure messages to Dr. Jackson, who had helped her escape. She contacted Commander Reeves, who had given her a chance when he could have had her arrested. She even made contact with sympathetic members of other species who had heard about the human woman protecting cubs. A network formed, slowly, carefully. They gathered information about Vex 9. They learned the routines of the guards. They identified weak points in the security systems. And they began to plan something that no one had attempted before, a rescue operation that mixed humans with sympathetic aliens from 5 different species. But something unexpected happened during the planning. The cubs began to change. Was teaching them to speak human words when she noticed it. The smallest cub, who she called, was making sounds that were not quite the standard communication pattern. They were words, human words, repeated the sounds and began to understand. Within days, all 3 cubs could say simple phrases in human speech. "Why you?" asked one morning, looking directly at. Sat down beside the young creature. "Why did I help you?" Nodded. "Because you needed help," said simply. "Because you were scared and alone, and because in my species we believe that compassion is stronger than fear." Made a chirping sound that had learned meant curiosity. "Mother hurt." His heart stopped. "Your mother?" "Yes," said carefully, trying out the human word. "Mother hurt, father hurt, we feel." Realized something extraordinary was happening. The cubs had a connection to their parents that went beyond simple biology. They could sense that something was wrong. They could feel the pain and separation from far away. "Your mother and father are alive," told them. "I promise you this. We will find them and we will bring them home." The cubs made excited chirping sounds. The other 2, who called mechs and huddled close to and repeated the sounds. That night sent a message too. "The cubs can sense their parents. They are connected somehow. This might be important." His response came quickly. "The bloodline carries a sensitivity that we rarely discuss outside our species. The young can feel the presence of their parents across great distances. If the cubs are connecting too, and then this connection might help us find them exactly. The prison is shielded from normal sensors, but a bloodline connection cannot be blocked." Looked at the 3 cubs sleeping peacefully. They had grown stronger every day. They had learned language and human kindness. But their true power came from something deeper. They came from a connection that transcended species, a bond between parent and child that even prison walls could not break. She understood now that the Crimson Order had made a terrible mistake. They had believed that releasing the cubs would destroy, and they had not understood that it would create a bridge. The separation itself would become the tool for reunion. Began preparations for the rescue in earnest. She reached out to her network of allies. She told them that the mission was now more than just saving 2. It was about proving that the bonds between different species could be stronger than the hatreds that had defined the galaxy for generations. She brought the 3 cubs into the planning. They huddled near the communications devices, their senses stretched across the stars toward parents they had never stopped feeling. Their presence and their connection reminded everyone involved in the rescue why they were willing to risk everything. The approach to Vex 9 took 3 days. Sat on the command bridge of a stolen transport ship, alongside Commander Reeves and representatives from 6 different alien species. The coalition seemed impossible on paper. Humans, 3 species of beings whose names did not translate easily into human language, and the one who had chosen to betray his own order to save, and "The cubs are becoming agitated," reported Dr. Jackson through the communication link. He was in the medical bay with mechs and monitoring their condition. "Their sensitivity is increasing as we approach. They are calling out." Closed her eyes. The cubs were connected to their parents, and as they drew closer to the prison moon, that connection grew stronger. The distress was being amplified on both sides of the separation. She had briefed everyone on this possibility, and they had accepted it. Sometimes pain was the price of hope. "All teams report ready," said Commander Reeves. He had gathered the best soldiers from multiple species. They were not a military unit in the traditional sense. They were a collection of individuals from different worlds who had each lost someone to war or violence, and who had decided that this moment, this mission, would be different. The plan was complex and relied on several points of failure. A strike team would hit the main guard station, while a second team would use the Cubs' connection to locate and within the prison. A third team would prepare the escape route. Timing had to be perfect. If any part failed, everyone would be trapped. The assault began at midnight, the artificial midnight of the prison facility. The strike team moved through the corridors with weapons ready. The guards of the Crimson Order responded quickly, but they were not prepared for an assault from so many different species working together. The guards expected to face human soldiers or perhaps peace faction. They did not expect to see warriors moving alongside humans, with providing cover fire from impossible angles. The fighting was fierce but brief. Within 15 minutes, the main guard station was secured. "Locate the detention block," said through the communication network. The second team had already moved deeper into the facility. Dr. Jackson was monitoring the Cubs' increasing agitation, using their connection as a living sensor. "North corridor, 200 meters down. The connection is getting stronger. The Cubs are crying out." Led a small team toward the detention block. She had insisted on being there for the moment of reunion. She needed to see it. She needed to know that what she had done, the rules she had broken, and the risks she had taken meant something. The detention block was heavily reinforced. Even with the main station compromised, the Crimson Order maintained control of the prisoners. Explosive charges were set. The walls came down and saw them. Was massive, nearly 3 times the size of his cubs, his metallic fur from battles and marked by the signs of imprisonment. Stood beside him, her body thin from months of captivity. Both of them moved toward the hole in the wall, toward the sound of their cubs' voices coming through the communication network. "Hold your positions," commanded the assault team. "Let them hear." The communication channel to the medical bay was opened fully. Mechs, and heard their parents' voices for the first time in months. The Cubs made sounds that had never heard before, complex and beautiful, a language of reunion and hope, and answered, moving toward the opening, toward freedom. But the Crimson Order had one final move left. Emergency lockdown protocols began to activate. The detention block doors, even with the outer wall destroyed, began to close. There was no way to stop them mechanically. They would seal in 30 seconds. "Rand." She sprinted toward and moving faster than she had ever moved before. The heavy doors descended toward the ground. 10 seconds left. She grabbed his arm and pulled. 5 seconds. Commander Reeves grabbed. They ran together, human, and toward the shrinking gap between the doors and the ground. They made it through with seconds to spare. Immediately looked toward, his large eyes filled with an emotion she could not quite name. He made a sound, a gentle chirping that was completely different from any sound had heard him make before. She understood what it meant: gratitude, recognition, kinship. The retreat was chaotic. The entire facility was shaking as explosives triggered throughout the structure, destabilizing it. The teams ran through corridors that were collapsing behind them, and moved slower than the younger soldiers, still weakened from captivity, but they did not slow down. They did not give up. They had their freedom and their cubs waiting for them. The transport ship launched with seconds to spare. As Vex 9 became smaller in the distance, stood on the bridge and breathed out. They had done it. They had walked into the heart of enemy territory and emerged with not just their lives, but with proof that something better was possible. Dr. Jackson brought the cubs to the bridge. Mechs and ran toward their parents, and the reunion happened in front of witnesses from 6 different species. Lowered his massive head and allowed his cubs to climb over him. Made soft, chirping sounds, her thin body trembling with emotion. The family held together, and no one in the room moved or spoke. Approached, "You did what our own government would not do. You risked everything for creatures that are not your own kind." "They are my kind," said quietly. "All of them. The moment those cubs touched my back, we became one family." The journey back to Federation space took 2 days. In that time, and recovered their strength. They moved about the ship freely, their cubs never far from their side, and they spoke with. Through translators and broken human words, they shared their understanding of who she was. Human said to her at one point, using the word like a name. Your species is rare. Most beings fear what they do not understand. Your species sometimes chooses understanding instead. Not always, said. We make mistakes, we fear things we should not fear. Yes, agreed. Like all species, but you choose better sometimes. This is enough. When they finally arrived at the Federation station, the news had already spread across the galaxy. A woman and her unlikely allies had rescued peace advocates from a prison moon controlled by extremists. More than that, they had done it together. Humans and working as one. The Crimson Order's response was immediate and violent, but it was too late. The image of those see the diplomatic chamber was vast and cold, with high ceilings and walls that reflected the light from 1,000 different sources. Representatives from the Federation gathered to witness something that almost no one had believed possible. A formal treaty between humanity and a binding agreement of mutual protection and cultural exchange. Stood in the public gallery, watching from the side. She was not supposed to be there. She was still technically a fugitive for her actions months ago. But Commander Reeves had made sure she received an invitation anyway. Some laws, he had said, were made to be broken when the moment was important enough. Sat at the negotiation table with beside him. Both of them looked stronger than they had in the prison. Sat next to them, representing the peace movement within society. Across from them sat Ambassador and the official Federation representatives. The humans had decided to send their best diplomats for this moment. The treaty before us recognizes the sovereignty and dignity of both the Empire and the Human Federation, Ambassador said formally. Both species agree to establish peaceful trading relationships and to come to each other's defense against external threats. It was simple language, but it contained worlds of meaning. For generations, humans had been enemies. War had claimed millions of lives. Now they were choosing something different. When the vote came, the treaty passed unanimously. The chamber erupted in applause. Some beings were crying. Others made sounds of celebration in their own languages. But attention was on the three cubs. Mechs sat in the viewing gallery above their parents, watching the moment their family had made possible. The cubs had grown significantly since first found them in the forest. They were no longer dependent on her for survival. But they still sought her out, still climbed onto her lap, still made the soft, chirping sounds that meant contentment. Looked down from the upper gallery and saw. The cub stood up and made a sound, a call that carried through the diplomatic chamber. Looked up and saw as well. He rose from his seat, a gesture that caused several guards to tense, but the ambassador waved them away. Walked across the diplomatic chamber toward the public gallery. The other representatives watched, uncertain what was happening. They had been bred for combat and conquest. This large male was leaving his position of power to approach a human woman. Some people feared he was about to attack, but stood calmly and waited. When reached her, he lowered his massive head. Mechs, and rushed down from the upper gallery and climbed onto shoulders and chest, the way they had done so many months ago when they were scared and alone. Made a low chirping sound, and the cubs responded with sounds of their own. Placed her hand on his metallic fur. "Thank you," she said softly. "No," replied his translator, converting the harsh clicking into human words. "Thank you. You showed us who we could be. You showed the galaxy who we could be. Your species does this sometimes. You reach into darkness and pull out light." The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it was witnessed by thousands in the chamber and billions across the communication networks of 100 worlds. A human and with three cubs between them, showing the galaxy that what had seemed impossible was simply the first step of something new. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days. Humans mingled in the Federation halls. They shared meals and stories. They learned about each other. Some of the conversations were awkward, some were contentious. Old wounds did not heal instantly, but the attempt to heal had been made, and that was everything. On the final night of the celebration, sat alone with her hoodie in her quarters. The fabric was stained and torn. There were small puncture marks from the cub's claws. There were areas that smelled of metallic fur and the nutrient paste she had fed them. To most people, it was a damaged piece of clothing that should have been discarded long ago. But for it was a map of everything that had happened. She could trace the moments of fear and discovery and joy in the damage and stains. She could remember the weight of the cubs against her chest, the warmth of their small bodies, the trust they had placed in her. Commander Reeves visited her later that evening. He carried a protective case made of crystal material. "The Federation Council wants to preserve this," he said, gesturing to the hoodie. "They want to put it in a museum as a symbol of what your choice led to, but they wanted you to decide." Held the hoodie in her hands. She thought about the woman she had been months ago, when she was just a scientist collecting samples on a remote moon. That woman would never have predicted how her life would change with a single act of compassion. "Let them preserve it," said finally. "But make sure they tell the real story. Tell them about the fear. Tell them about the choice. Tell them that I did not do anything special. I simply refused to ignore something that needed help." "The galaxy does not see it that way," Reeves said. "The galaxy sees you as the human who changed everything." "Then I hope others will find the courage to change things too," replied. Over the following months and years, something remarkable happened across human space and the Empire. Young humans and young began to meet in neutral zones. They began to learn about each other. Some friendships formed. Some romances even began to develop. The old fears did not disappear entirely. The Crimson Order continued their resistance, and there were still those humans who remembered the wars and could not forgive. But the possibility had been opened. The door had been opened by 3 cubs looking for warmth and safety, and by a human woman who had chosen to see them not as weapons or problems to be solved, but as children who needed help. Eventually left the diplomatic service. She took a position teaching xenobiology at the Federation Academy, a position that allowed her to work with young students from multiple species. Mechs, and visited her regularly, now nearly adult but still maintaining the bond they had formed in those early desperate days. One afternoon, as sat in her classroom preparing for a lecture, entered and settled onto a cushion nearby. The young had grown massive and powerful, with the kind of strength that could destroy most beings. But the cub that had trusted on a forest moon still carried something of that original scared youngster. "You think today about the beginning," said. It was not a question. "Yes," admitted. "I was remembering when I first found you." "You were scared," said. "We felt it." "I was," agreed, "but I was more scared of leaving you alone." Made the familiar chirping sound, the one that meant contentment and belonging. "You teach others now. You teach them to reach into darkness and pull out light. This is good. This is what we needed." Looked at her young friend, this creature that had once depended on her for survival and now carried his own strength. She thought about, and now prominent voices for peace in their empire. She thought about the treaties that had been signed. She thought about the wars that had not happened because someone had chosen compassion. All of it had started in a forest on a moon no one cared about, with 3 cubs looking for warmth, and a human woman with a hoodie who understood that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could reshape worlds. And she knew that this was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning of everything that humanity and the could build together when they chose to see each other not as enemies, but as beings capable of understanding and growth and love. The future spread out before them, uncertain but filled with possibility. And it had all started with a tiny claw tap on her back and a woman who knew how to listen. With their parents, of the family reunited despite the impossible odds, had already burned itself into the minds of billions across the galaxy. What came next would be the most important part of all. Because some things transcended fear. Some things transcended species. Some things transcended everything except the simple, powerful truth that a child deserved to be reunited with the ones who loved them. Human colonies, a woman protecting 3 cubs, a human who had chosen compassion over fear. The stories inspired people. In settlements across the galaxy, humans began to question the old hatreds. Some people called a traitor, but many more called her something else. A hope. The cubs grew stronger every day. They learned to walk beside instead of clinging to her jacket. They learned to respond to their names, sounds that had devised from listening to how their parents might have called them. And they learned that at least one human did not see them as monsters to be feared or objects to be controlled. They saw her as a mother who would protect them no matter what the cost might be. She walked toward the settlement gates with her jacket held carefully closed. The 3 cubs breathed softly against her chest and took the first step into a future neither she nor anyone else could have anticipated.